Alright, so welcome to the channel. This is Dr. Johan, and today we're gonna do something a bit different. We're gonna do a massive deep dive because for now you probably have seen all my videos with the vocal analysis and I detect for you okay what I see, etc. But what we're gonna do now is KATSEYE versus NONA at the Heads in the Cloud Festival. Let's compare together the songs Shoot versus My Way. They're a bit similar in the vocal style, so I was allowing myself to analyze them together. That's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna do a massive deep dive in the song and see what they have in common, the voices, and let's see how the bands differ, right? So that's actually very interesting. So far, that's part of this series of my basically upgraded channel where we have more data and we can look at it. This is what I was preparing. Is not everything is here, you know. I have more surprise for you coming up. So we're gonna do vibrato. We're gonna do like off-key moments. Watch until the end. It's very interesting. The off-key moments, so we can try to see which artist is a bit like, let's say, have more perfectionist in some way or can improve in other way. So first, this is the pitch stability distribution. That's a Boxplot. Basically, it shows you how far away they are from the real pitch. The higher you have a pitch deviation. So we can see KATSEYE, for example, here have some points, like a little bit, we call it that outliers, and this is about plot. Everything that is in the rectangle, this is 50% of the matrix, 50% of matrix in the rectangle as well, and outside the rectangle is 50% as well. So let's see what we have. We can see, for example, like what's like in my eyes that I can see right away. If I look at KATSEYE, you can see they're close to the bottom, right? The big rectangle is closer to the bottom. That means their pitch is better, right? Their pitch difference basically measure the pitch difference compared to the live versus the studio. It means that in average, and the average is around here probably, you can watch it here. The mode is what separates all the values anyway. So you can see that KATSEYE is a little bit like below. That's normal because NONA is a bit higher. They have more, let's say, a pitch difference, right? It doesn't mean they have a pitch mistakes, right? That means that KATSEYE is a bit like closer to the studio version, right? But sometimes you can see that with a few difference, they are a bit like 1, 2, 3, 4 points. They are a bit like too far away from the studio version, right? So that's interesting to know that. But you can see in average, that's new metric, right? We can see that KATSEYE is actually more accurate. That's what we can get, right? What I'm understanding from this graphics is that KATSEYE is a bit more accurate than NONA because the average is like lower. We're talking average, but that's not it, right? To measure things in a different ways, in a different light, I also want to see something else. So basically, I want to see now, for example, it's one thing to look at all the points. Now let's try to we call it an enrichment analysis. Now let's try to enrich by dividing into categories. So let's see now in which categories, let's say. All right, so I found a way to display it more faster. So you can see now we're talking about division and enrichment. So we did an enrichment. I mean, I did an enrichment with my data analysis. You know, I'm data analyst, I'm a medical doctor now. This is my specialty. This is what I do. I divided into high dynamic variations and medium variations and low variations. We can see the high dynamic variation on KATSEYE is a bit higher on percentage because it's normal. You see the little outliers, the little dots I showed you before. We can see it's 2.7% and the low variation they're more. So I would say that NONA, you can see NONA, what's really interesting with NONA is that they have more medium variation, but KATSEYE are more like brief moments where they're a bit like different than the usual pitch they're supposed to be singing, right? So that's interesting. That doesn't mean like they're off key or anything. That could also mean they change the way they do it live, right? Because my way they changed the way they did it live. So that just means that doesn't mean signifying like they're off key or anything. That just show you a bit like this type of interpretation. We have to be very careful to what we do, and as far as I know, and that's why like analyzing like it's a specialty, right? And I've been doing that for like 15 years, maybe like 20 years now, if I count the time when I was like a medical student. you have to be very careful because it can also, it doesn't mean really that it's like a mistake, right? It's a choice. And in KATSEYE, in the my way, when we analyze together, and again look at the video I uploaded, when we look at KATSEYE's My Way at the Heads in the Cloud festival in LA, we could see they changed the notes, right? So if we didn't know that, we could say, oh, they did some mistake. No, they did on purpose. So I variation actually on purpose. Whereas NONA, they didn't so much like change the songs too much, right? So I would say KATSEYE here, even though they hide dynamic variation, is actually like accounted for those songs, right? But it's the limits of data analysis, right? That's the limits of data analysis. You have to enrich, and then you cannot draw a conclusion from graphics, right? You have to know everything. So that's why it takes like, it's a specialty, especially in medicine. So you have to know what you're doing basically. Okay, so now I'm gonna move to the other graphics and we're gonna interpret it together. Okay, so I think I know how to change things, you know, like, okay, let's do that. Well, I'm happy to show you because it's like very like what I do for, for, I guess, in medical specialty. This is the analysis I'm doing. So we're looking at the pitch stability, right? So basically the lower, right, you're a bit higher dynamic variation. That's not actually this one right here. Don't count this one as a high dynamic variation. It doesn't show right here. But we can see something interesting is that basically what we can see is like KATSEYE My Way, right? They were closer to this spot right here as n, and it's an average, right? That's an average. Basically, you can see that's an average. So obviously things were going above it, right? Maybe one of those things were also going above it. We don't know with average. I didn't show you like the bar plot anyway. Here we can see what we can do on average. We can see that, for example, on the pitch stability for the middle zones, the middle registry of the voice, KATSEYE is better, right? As a bit like on average, right? On average, also KATSEYE is more consistent, and on the lower end variation, KATSEYE is also more consistent, right? So I would say on average, KATSEYE has a bit of like a controlled pitch of their own voice. They do it very well live. Whereas NONA, and we can see when we analyze it together, NONA is a bit like more expressive and more dynamic, right? And those little variation that we can see right here, and again, it doesn't cross the threshold because it's an average, so there are points showing up that I don't show you. There are like basically like on the upper, and I believe that was then we're doing the variation of the my way variation for the heads in the cloud. So that's it. That's what I can say from this graph. So now let's move to the other graph together. All right, so now this is like deeper, right? So now you take a seat, right? Because now we're going deeper into details, and that's it. That's the purpose of these things that I'm making with you, right? So now we're looking at, let's say, for example, NONA shoot. I'm going to explain you what it is so you don't get scared. Basically, this is what we call a heat map. Heat map, there is like 3 dimensions. There is like, oh, sorry, 4 dimensions actually, 5. Anyway, there is a lot of dimensions that we can read. So slow is like the pattern is the track slow or fast. Medium, the speed, the fast, the speed of whatever, and the range. And when they say NAN, it's like non-applicable, non-assigned, in 0. Right. So basically, right here we can see that that most of the NONA shoot song is right in the middle, right, with the number. If we look at the numbers that are in the middle, right, that's the middle medium song, medium speed with middle registry, and sometimes they are a bit lower, and sometimes they are upper, right. They're a bit like well separated, and sometimes with an extreme low and extreme high. We can see there is a bit of mistakes, so that's really, it's really interesting. Like this type of thing is really, I'm taking time to explain, like, but like basically what we can see on the 3 points, data points we have on the slow and lower, this is what their pitch was a bit difficult to achieve, right? We can see that's the metric. One is 46% right here. That's the stability was not really here. So what can we get from KATSEYE now? You see, on KATSEYE it's a bit different, right? KATSEYE, when they're a bit different, was on the upper and the medium. But this part, we acknowledge together that this part was actually when I was doing the variation of my way in heads in the cloud. So that's interesting. That's interesting that way. So basically, like, I would say that NONA on the pitch stability is less stable, and KATSEYE on the pitch stability overall in the song, KATSEYE is a bit better. We can see like where KATSEYE is shining. cut size is very shining actually in the lower and the medium speed lower compared to NONA, right? And actually we're talking average, we're not talking absolute. So we will have to run like actually a precise like analysis and with more songs. I'm just showing like 2 songs, but we can do it with 100 songs, 200 songs of the same artist and like putting that together, right? That's what I'm doing here. But I'm starting the series with things that are a bit difficult, so less difficult. Okay, so what do we have next? What can I show you next? What can I show you? Can I change the? All right. Oh, nice. So, all right. Now we go into the note confidence. Note confidence is at like I said before, is like uh, a note is coming, right? We already know in the audio analysis of the studio where is the note should be. Where the initial note confidence is this note the first note of the line of the sentence, like above or below or right in the middle. So we can see something interesting here, and that's what this type of analysis, where are they shining? And you can see that again, NONA has a bit of tendency to have like a, we have to look at the value, right? Because everything is like scaled up. So let's look at the value instead of the colors. But you can see NONA is a bit like sometimes a bit more precise, I would say. Look, if we have to compare like them together, like okay, the medium and the external low for 2 of them. So let's look at them like 3 and 4. That's a bit similar. But look at this lower right here, and this one is lower. So basically, cut size is a bit like on the lower medium, like on the initial note, like it's a bit like a bit behind, right? So, and on the, they did actually one problem right here, and we can discuss if it's really a problem, but like on the slow and the lower, it's like the highest mistake they did, right? So we have to check that in the videos, that we will do that next time. But it's really interesting. So far, and actually, what we can understand is that compared to NONA, cut size really shine in the upper section, in the upper registry section, and the fast. You see, like compared to, you can see right here, compared to NONA, that's what I'm getting from here, from this graph, and also the extreme high. On the extreme high notes, so we can say that here we compare at 200 and 100, we can say definitely that cut size on the higher note, on the higher registry, cut size, they know what they're doing. That's what it means. When they know what they're not going to see, they don't make any mistakes, right? Uh, I would say like variation, they have less variation. Basically, they hit straight more, right? Uh, and what we can say after that, we can say in the middle, the slow, we can see that in the middle, obviously, a slow songs in the middle registry, we can see that NONA is a bit like, I would say, more confident than cut size, right? So that's what this graph is telling you about the band signature style for one song. And again, we can run for more different songs. So now let's move to something else now. The initial note deviation, again, that's what I was like showing you a bit before on the same. So if we compare like, that's the confidence, that's the note, that's a bit different. The initial note deviation, so we can see we had cut size a bit like deviating more, right, than NONA on those parts right here. And then we have cut size on the, like I told you before, it's representative of the graph before, right? Cut size on the upper part and extreme high, they are very, very confident on the note, right? So that's what it means, right? So that's interesting to know as well. So now let's look at the tail deviation. That's the ending of the songs, and we can see that cut size is very extremely precise, right? Extremely precise as well. We can see, if compare in the middle notes, in the middle range, you can see the deviation is like on average is a bit better in the middle for cut size, as well the lower. They have an extreme low, I don't know why, but like we have to explore it. But so far we can say like cut size on the control of the ending, cut size was way better. What I told you many times in the videos, that the note deviation at the end is basically like the fatigue, right? So what we can get from this table is that cut size was like not tired, and we can get that NONA maybe was a bit more tired, right, of dancing and everything. So cut size, my way, cut size performance, they were less tired. That's what it means. Now let's look at the belts. we can call bias risk, and that's really interesting, right? This is what I like, this type of analysis, because we can go deep together and we can do that like really, and I can show you really what goes on behind the scenes, what I do, and we can do that together. This is like the risks versus the jump. Basically, like we look at the summitum change, right? And then we look at the bounces. The bounce is like the PSR before the PSR kicks in. The more bounces you have, the more you're less like stable, right? That's what it means. So you can see like cut size, where we can get from this graph, because it's important to describe the graphics. Cut size gets more risk, right? It's getting more risk, right? You can see high risk, a summitum change, half an octave basically, and they no bounces, no PSR, maybe a super PSR, and that was perfect, right? You can see. And on the other end, cut size was a bit too much risk, right? And you can see they bounce a bit more after that, right? So that's fine, right? That happens, but it's interesting to see it. So we can see that where we can see NONA, for example, as difference, you can see the point. NONA is a bit more like not too much risk, right? But they stay in the, because I'm talking about the risk, cut size took a serious risk in this higher octave and not higher like change, right? And you can see that NONA is more, let's say, like more taking kind of the same vibe of taking a 5 summitum change, right? And with just few average bounces. The perfect, they kind of ex aequo on the perfect, basically the perfect landings, right? So we can see NONA ex aequo on the number, and we can see cut size as well here. I think cut size, what we can get from this graph is that cut size takes way more risk, right? That's what we can get. And they aligned it, you can see as well, like they're a bit here. And we can see again, something interesting in the song distributions is that basically like cut size is like more sparse in what they do, whereas cut size, you can see what they do on the summitum change part of the song. They kind of not do like the 4 summitum changes. That's what we get. That's more like how the song is made. So that's, I believe that stuff like this are really interesting. So stabilization, I'm not gonna go do it. We can see the idle stable runs, right? So NONA and KATSEYE. So I believe you can see how KATSEYE during the song is, and you can see here they are very like sharp. KATSEYE is like more on the idle quality above like the threshold. So, but on average they're a bit like lower. That's interesting to see. If I can show you the average. On the off-key moments, right? Interesting, the off-key moments, what we can get is that cut size is not off-key so much, right? It's more like what they do, cut size spend a bit off-key, right, in the extreme lowers compared to NONA. And NONA on the song Shoot, there you can see they are dominating the off-key moments, right? That's what we get on the upper registry. There is just cut size that's a bit like on the extreme lower values of the vocal frequencies. They're a bit like, this is what I get. So again, cut size kind of comes up on top of it, right? On their songs. The errors in the sound, right? Very interesting as well to define the errors in the sound, and you can see on the NONA Shoot, even though it was, I think it was recorded like live from I took the live festival video. I guess there was a bit of like different like vocals, kind of like where it was like too quiet, actually sometimes. And if you look at the video, sometimes they tell you like I don't know why it's like lower and it gets lower and bigger at the same time. So yeah. What do we have next? Do we have something else, or that's it for you? Okay, well that's it for you. Like I guess that's it for today, right? So again, let me know, comment what do you think about this analysis. If you have something, anything else to